The first arrow should have killed one of the Alpha King's cubs. Instead, it buried itself in the back of an Omega girl who was never supposed to matter. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She only tightened her arms around the 3 terrified wolf cubs trembling beneath her cloak as another wave of arrows tore through the sky. Then another. And another. Within seconds, daylight vanished behind a storm of black feathers. Royal soldiers abandoned their formation. War horses collapsed into the snow. Shields shattered. The air filled with steel, blood, and desperate orders that no one could hear above the relentless rain of arrows. The Alpha King was still fighting hundreds of yards away. He had no idea his entire bloodline had been left exposed. No idea that the only thing standing between his children and death was an abandoned Omega every noble in the kingdom believed was too weak to survive a single winter. She could still escape. The forest was only a few heartbeats away. One sprint, one chance, one choice. Instead, she dropped to her knees, curled her body over the cubs, and became their shield. Arrow after arrow slammed into the frozen earth around her. One ripped through her shoulder. Another pierced her side. Still, she did not move. The cubs never saw her face. Only the warmth of trembling arms refusing to let them die. Then the battlefield suddenly fell silent. Not because the attack had ended, but because the Alpha King finally turned and saw an Omega bleeding beneath a mountain of arrows while his children were still alive beneath her. In that single heartbeat, the war stopped being about a kingdom. It became about one impossible question. Why would the most forgotten girl in the realm willingly die for the children of a king who had never even known her name? Winter ruled Ashenfang with quiet authority. The mountains wore crowns of ice that shimmered beneath the fading moon, while endless forests stretched across the valleys like sleeping oceans of dark emerald. Frost clung to every branch. Rivers moved beneath sheets of crystal, whispering beneath the frozen surface as though ancient spirits still wandered below the ice. Far above the valley floor, Blackfang Keep stood upon a cliff carved by centuries of wind and war. Massive stone walls surrounded the kingdom's strongest fortress, its banners fluttering against the biting northern wind. Generations of Alpha rulers had governed from those towers, each leaving behind legends written in blood, sacrifice, and impossible victories. But this morning, the kingdom felt strangely peaceful. Too peaceful. The royal hunting procession wound its way through Frostpine Valley, where ancient trees rose toward the heavens like silent guardians older than memory itself. Snow crunched beneath armored boots. Horses breathed clouds of white into the cold morning air. Wolves padded silently beside elite warriors, their golden eyes scanning every shadow. At the center of the procession rode Alpha King Kaelin Draven. Even without speaking, he commanded the attention of every soul around him. He sat astride an enormous black warhorse, his dark cloak flowing behind him like smoke carried by the wind. Silver wolf armor covered his broad shoulders, each engraved plate bearing scars from battles few men had survived. His expression remained unreadable, carved from years of discipline and grief. The people called him the Iron Wolf. Children whispered that monsters feared him. Enemies prayed never to meet his eyes on a battlefield. Yet none of those stories revealed the exhaustion hidden beneath his cold exterior. His gaze drifted briefly toward the wagon traveling behind him. Inside, 3 young wolf cubs tumbled over one another beneath thick fur blankets. Barely old enough to understand the dangers surrounding them, they chased each other's tails while soft, playful growls filled the chilly air. For the first time in many days, Kaelin allowed the corner of his mouth to soften. Only they could still reach the part of him that war had failed to destroy. Captain Rowan guided his horse closer. "Your Majesty, the sanctuary lies beyond the next ridge." Kaelin gave a silent nod. "The cubs will be safe there." He wanted to believe those words. The sanctuary of the first tree had protected royal bloodlines for centuries. Ancient magic surrounded its sacred roots, shielding every child entrusted to its care. Today was supposed to be a simple journey. No battles, no politics, only peace. But somewhere high above the valley, hidden between frozen cliffs, someone waited. Dozens of archers lay perfectly still beneath white camouflage cloaks. Their bows were already drawn. Their breathing slow, patient, watching. The signal had not yet come. Miles away from the royal procession, another life unfolded in complete ignorance of the danger creeping closer. Elara Vale knelt beside a frozen stream where clusters of pale blue frost flowers pushed stubbornly through the snow. Her fingers worked carefully despite the bitter cold, gently lifting delicate herbs into a woven basket resting beside her boots. She had gathered these plants every winter since childhood. Each carried healing properties her adoptive grandmother had taught her before illness claimed her life. The old woman used to say, "Even the smallest flower survives because it refuses to surrender to winter." Elara smiled sadly at the memory. She still missed her every day. The mountain village where she lived rarely welcomed omegas with kindness. To most people, omegas represented weakness, fragility, bad fortune. She had learned long ago that silence protected her better than arguments ever could. So she healed quietly, worked quietly, loved quietly, and expected nothing in return. A distant howl echoed across the valley. Elara looked toward the trees. Strange. The wolves sounded nervous. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. Her heartbeat quickened. Nature always noticed danger before people did. She rose slowly, tightening her cloak around her shoulders. Then, the world exploded. A horn blared somewhere beyond the ridge. It was followed instantly by terrified screams. Steel clashed against steel. Horses shrieked. And then came the sound no battlefield survivor ever forgot. Thousands of arrows slicing through the air together. Elara instinctively dropped behind a fallen log. The sky darkened. Black-feathered arrows poured downward like a storm unleashed by furious gods. Trees splintered. Snow erupted in violent sprays. Men shouted desperate orders as chaos swallowed the peaceful valley whole. Her breathing became shallow. She should run. Every instinct screamed for survival. The forest behind her offered escape. She could disappear before anyone ever knew she had been there. Then, she heard something else. Tiny, frightened cries. Not wolves. Not soldiers. Children. She slowly lifted her head above the log. Beyond the battlefield, an overturned wagon rested against a broken pine. 3 small wolf cubs stumbled through the snow, crying desperately for someone who wasn't coming. Royal guards rushed toward the king. No one saw the cubs. Another wave of arrows rose into the sky, straight toward them. Time slowed. Elara stared. Her heartbeat pounded painfully against her ribs. Memories flooded her mind. Flames consuming her childhood home. Her mother's desperate embrace. The helpless feeling of watching everything she loved disappear because no one reached them in time. Not again. Never again. Without allowing herself another thought, she ran. Snow flew beneath her boots as arrows struck the ground around her. One buried itself inches from her foot. Another sliced through her sleeve. She ignored them all. The cubs looked up with terrified golden eyes. One tried bravely to stand between his siblings and the falling arrows despite trembling legs. Elara's heart broke. She reached them just as another deadly shadow covered the sky. There was no shelter. No wall. No shield. Only her. She threw herself over the 3 tiny bodies, wrapping her arms around them as tightly as she could. The impact came instantly. Arrows slammed into the earth around her. Wood shattered. Snow exploded upward. Pain erupted across her shoulder as one arrow tore through flesh before burying itself beneath her. She bit down on a cry. The cubs whimpered beneath her cloak. "It's all right," she whispered through trembling breaths. "I'm here." Another volley. Closer. Louder. One arrow grazed her back. Another pierced the ground beside her face. Still, she refused to move. Across the battlefield, Kalen cut down the final assassin blocking his path. Blood stained the pristine snow. Then he saw her. A lone Omega, curled protectively over the royal cubs while death reigned around her. For a heartbeat, the entire battlefield seemed to fall silent. No fear. No hesitation. She had chosen his family over her own life. Kalen spurred his horse forward with a roar that echoed through Frostpine Valley. His warriors followed like wolves unleashed. The assassins broke ranks, retreated, vanished into the forest as suddenly as they had appeared. When Kalen finally reached the clearing, the girl was still shielding the cubs. Even though the arrows had stopped falling, she had not moved. And when he knelt beside her, he realized she had lost consciousness without ever letting go of him. As he carefully lifted her into his arms, something impossible happened. The savage beast buried deep inside his soul, the curse that had tormented him for years, fell completely silent. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was peace. Neither Kalen nor anyone around him noticed the ancient silver runes awakening beneath the snow. But far beyond the valley, a hooded figure watched from a distant cliff. A slow smile spread across unseen lips. The bond has awakened. The stranger turned into the blizzard and disappeared. Because the arrows had never been meant to kill the Alpha King's cubs. They had always been meant to find her. Darkness drifted in and out of Elara's consciousness like icy waves beneath a frozen river. Pain came first. A deep, burning ache spread through her shoulder where the arrow had torn flesh. Every breath felt heavy, carrying the scent of crushed pine, smoke, and unfamiliar herbs. Somewhere nearby, logs crackled inside an enormous fireplace, filling the silence with soft pops that sounded strangely comforting. She tried to open her eyes. The ceiling above her was nothing like the rough wooden beams of her little cottage. Instead, towering stone arches stretched high overhead, carved with wolves, moons, and ancient runes glowing faintly beneath flickering torchlight. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows where snow drifted lazily against the glass. For one frightened heartbeat, she wondered if she had died. Then voices reached her. "She's awake." A maid hurried toward the bed, while another disappeared through a carved oak doorway. "Inform His Majesty. His Majesty." The word struck Elara harder than the wound. Memory returned in scattered flashes. The arrows, the cubs, the screaming, the enormous black wolf banner flying above armored soldiers. She pushed herself upright too quickly. Pain exploded through her shoulder. A gasp escaped her lips as the room tilted violently. "No," an elderly healer said gently, placing careful hands upon her shoulders. The arrow nearly shattered the bone. "Rest." The cubs. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Were they?" "They're alive." The healer smiled. "They have not left the palace nursery since asking whether the brave lady would wake." Relief washed across Elara's face so suddenly that tears stung her eyes. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. The healer studied her quietly. Most people awakened after surviving such horror asking whether they themselves would live. This Omega's first thought had been for someone else's children. Before another word could be spoken, the chamber doors opened. Every servant immediately lowered their head. The room itself seemed to become colder. Alpha King Kalen Draven entered without haste. His dark cloak still carried melted snow from the battlefield, while dried blood stained the silver edges of his armor. He looked every bit the terrifying ruler whispered about throughout the kingdom. Except, his eyes went directly to Elara. Not to the healer. Not to the servants. Only her. The room emptied without command. Soon only silence remained. Kalen stood beside the bed for several long moments. Neither spoke. Outside, winter winds scraped softly against ancient stone walls. Finally, "You should have run."
His voice was calm, low,
controlled. "You would have lived." Elara lowered her gaze. "So would they." "They aren't your family," she answered without looking at him. They were frightened. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. There had been no calculation, no desire for reward, only compassion. Kalen had spent years among nobles who measured kindness like currency. This girl spoke as though risking her life had required no thought at all. "You knew they belonged to the crown?" She nodded faintly. "I recognized the royal markings." "And you still ran toward them?" Another quiet nod. Kalen looked away toward the falling snow outside. He had commanded armies numbering in the tens of thousands. He had watched hardened warriors abandon comrades to save themselves. Yet an Omega healer everyone overlooked had done what his finest soldiers almost failed to do. Something inside him shifted. Not trust. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Respect. Elsewhere inside Blackfang Keep, respect was becoming a problem. Lady Seraphine Vera stood beside an enormous stained-glass window overlooking the central courtyard. Snowflakes drifted gracefully through the morning air while servants hurried below carrying baskets, firewood, and supplies. Her emerald gown shimmered like polished jade beneath the sunlight. Elegant. Perfect. Untouchable. A maid approached carefully. "Your Grace." The Omega survived. It wasn't a question. "No, my lady." Seraphine smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Cold enough to freeze rivers. What else? The king personally carried her from Frostpine Valley. Silence. The maids suddenly regretted speaking. The cubs refused to leave her bedside. Another silence. Longer this time. Seraphine slowly traced one elegant finger along the frosted window. So, she has already entered the palace, through the only door that matters. Affection. Not politics. Not ambition. Affection. That was infinitely harder to destroy. She turned gracefully. "Summon Lord Cashin." "My lady, the court will soon require guidance." Days passed. Elara's wounds healed slowly. Although physically surrounded by luxury, emotionally, she had never felt more alone. Servants bowed politely, yet whispered once she passed. The king carried her himself. An Omega? She planned it. She bewitched the cubs. Every corridor carried another rumor. Every smile hid another accusation. She missed the mountains. She missed silence. She missed being invisible. One afternoon she wandered into the palace gardens while the healers believed she slept. Snow covered every hedge in sparkling white crystal. Frozen fountains stood like sculptures beneath pale winter light. For the first time since arriving, she breathed freely. Then, tiny paws crashed into her legs. She laughed in surprise. The 3 royal cubs had escaped their attendants again. One tugged playfully at her cloak. Another rolled happily across the snow. The smallest climbed awkwardly into her lap, refusing to move. "You shouldn't be here." She smiled. "They'll scold all of us." The cub answered by licking her hand. A deep voice interrupted. "They've already decided." Kalen stood several paces away, watching. The cubs immediately bounded toward him before returning to Elara again, unable to choose between them. Kalen almost smiled. Almost. They don't trust easily. They're lonely. His expression darkened. They lost their parents. So did I. The words escaped before she realized she'd spoken them. Silence settled gently between them. For the first time, neither stood as king nor Omega. Only 2 people carrying grief too heavy for their years. Before Kalen could answer, a howl echoed through the castle. Not outside. Inside. Deep beneath the fortress. Every wolf in the garden instantly froze. The cubs whimpered. Kalen's expression changed. All warmth vanished. Pain replaced it.
Raw.
Terrible. Go inside. His voice had become strained. Immediately, Elara felt something invisible move through the air, like darkness breathing. The king staggered slightly. His hands clenched. Veins darkened beneath the skin of his neck. Golden eyes flickered, then slowly began turning crimson. Another howl erupted below the castle. Longer this time. Hungrier. Kalen closed his eyes. "No," he whispered to himself. "Not now." The beast was waking. And somewhere in the shadows above the courtyard, Lady Seraphine watched everything with quiet satisfaction. Because tonight, the Alpha King's greatest secret would no longer remain hidden. Night descended over Blackfang Keep like a living shadow. The last traces of crimson sunset disappeared behind the jagged mountains, leaving the fortress surrounded by endless darkness. Snow continued to fall in slow, silent waves, covering the ancient stone walls in white while icy winds howled through the battlements like restless spirits searching for forgotten names. Inside the castle, however, no one dared speak above a whisper. Every servant hurried through the corridors with lowered eyes. Every guard tightened his grip around his spear. They all recognized the signs. Tonight, the beast would awaken. Deep beneath the fortress, beyond iron gates thicker than ancient oak trunks, lay a forgotten chamber carved directly into the mountain itself. The walls were covered in enormous silver runes. Massive chains hung from stone pillars blackened by claw marks that had accumulated over decades. The air smelled of iron, smoke, and old blood. Captain Rowan stood beside 6 elite alpha warriors. Every man wore fresh scars. Every scar had been given by the same person. "The restraints are ready," one warrior muttered. Rowan nodded without taking his eyes off the heavy iron door. "They've never been enough." Silence answered him. No one argued, because everyone knew the truth. The strongest enemy Ashenfang had ever faced lived inside its own king. Far above, Kalen stood alone on the highest balcony of Blackfang Keep. Snow landed across his broad shoulders without melting. His breathing had become uneven. His heartbeat thundered inside his chest. The curse was coming. He could feel it crawling beneath his skin like molten fire. Dark veins slowly spread across his hands. His golden eyes reflected the moonlight with an unnatural glow. For years he had fought it. Every battle, every full moon, every surge of rage fed the monster sleeping inside him. He closed his eyes, not from fear,
From shame.
He had defeated kings, slain monsters, protected his kingdom. Yet every month he became the very creature he hated most. A monster that could kill innocent people if his control failed. Footsteps approached behind him. "Captain Rowan." "Your Majesty." "It has begun." Kalen didn't turn. "I know. The chamber is prepared." For a long moment neither man spoke. Finally Kalen unclasped the silver wolf cloak resting across his shoulders. He handed it to Rowan. "If I lose myself." His voice remained calm. "You know what must be done." Rowan's jaw tightened painfully. "I will not raise my blade against my king." "You will." Kalen finally looked toward him, not as ruler, as friend. "If the beast escapes, there will be no king left." Elsewhere inside the castle, Elara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard arrows falling through the sky. She heard frightened cubs crying beneath her arms. She saw blood staining white snow. The nightmare refused to leave. Then another sound reached her.
A howl.
Not like any wolf she had ever heard. It wasn't wild. It wasn't angry. It sounded
Broken.
lonely, as though something enormous was screaming against invisible chains. She sat upright. Again, the howl echoed through the castle walls. Even the candles flickered. The young maid assigned to watch over her rushed inside. "My lady, what was that?" The girl immediately turned pale. "You mustn't ask." It sounded hurt. "Please." The maid looked toward the closed door. "Forget you heard it, but His Majesty has forbidden anyone from going below the western tower." Elara frowned. The maid nodded. "There are places inside this castle even nobles refuse to enter." Another howl interrupted them. Closer. This one ended with the unmistakable sound of iron chains snapping tight. Elara felt her heartbeat quicken. Someone wasn't simply imprisoned. Someone was suffering. Below. Kalen entered the underground chamber. The enormous iron doors slammed shut behind him with a deafening boom. One by one, heavy chains were fastened around his wrists, his ankles, his waist, across his chest. The enchanted silver restraints glowed faintly beneath torchlight. Rowan hesitated. "There is still time." Kalen shook his head. "No." He looked toward every warrior present. "If the final seal breaks, no hesitation." Every man silently nodded. None believed they would survive if that happened. The moon reached its highest point. Then everything changed. Kalen gasped sharply. His body arched violently. Bones cracked beneath his skin with sounds that echoed through the chamber. The chains strained. Muscles expanded. Dark veins spread across his neck like living shadows. Golden eyes slowly transformed into burning crimson. A low growl emerged from deep inside his chest. Not human. Not wolf. Something far older. The beast had awakened. Far above, Elara suddenly dropped the cup she had been holding. It shattered across the stone floor. Her chest tightened. She couldn't explain it. Some invisible force pulled her toward the western tower, like a heartbeat calling another heartbeat. The strange silver warmth she'd briefly felt when the king carried her from Frostpine Valley returned. Stronger now. Much stronger. Her pulse echoed inside her ears. Thump, thump, thump. Not just hers. Someone else's. The same impossible rhythm. The same invisible connection. She stood almost without thinking. I have to go. The maid blocked the doorway. No. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Tears formed in the maid's frightened eyes. Everyone who has ever gone below during the full moon never came back. Another roar shook the castle. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The windows trembled. The cubs in the royal nursery began crying simultaneously. Elara pressed a trembling hand against her own heart. It hurt, not physically, emotionally, as though someone else's unbearable pain had somehow become hers. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't explain it. She simply knew. Someone needed her. In the underground chamber, the last silver chain snapped. The sound exploded through the cavern. One terrified warrior barely managed to raise his shield before an enormous claw sent him crashing into a stone pillar. Another was thrown across the chamber. Torches fell. Fire scattered across the floor. The creature standing where Kaelin had once been was nearly 10 feet tall. Its body was covered in black fur streaked with silver. Massive claws tore grooves into solid stone. Crimson eyes burned with uncontrollable fury. Yet somewhere, deep inside those monstrous eyes, a fragment of the king still remained. Fighting, suffering, begging for control. The beast roared. The mountain itself seemed to answer. Captain Rowan drew his sword. Hold the line. The remaining warriors charged. None truly believed they could stop him. Above them, Elara quietly slipped past the frightened maid. She stepped into the empty corridor. Another roar echoed beneath her feet. Instead of fear, she felt sorrow, an overwhelming sadness she had never experienced before. As though the creature below wasn't evil, only alone. She followed the invisible pull deeper into the castle, toward the western tower, toward the forbidden chamber, toward the secret that would change both their lives forever. And hidden within the shadows of an upper balcony, Lady Seraphine watched the Omega disappear down the staircase. A slow smile touched her lips. Exactly as planned. If fate insists on bringing you to the beast, she whispered into the darkness, then let the beast be the one that destroys you. Behind her, unseen by everyone, a hooded messenger silently disappeared into the night, carrying another sealed letter. Its destination lay beyond Ashenfang's borders, and its message contained only 6 chilling words. The moon bond has finally awakened tonight. The stone staircase spiraled endlessly beneath Blackfang Keep. Each step carried Elara farther from the warmth of the castle and deeper into a darkness that felt older than the kingdom itself. The air grew colder with every breath. Moisture dripped from the ancient walls, echoing through the narrow passage like a slow, relentless clock counting down toward something inevitable. Above her, the sounds of the palace disappeared. Below, only the roars remained. Not the triumphant roar of a predator. Not the furious cry of a warrior. These were cries of unbearable agony. Every howl trembled with pain so profound that Elara felt it inside her own chest. She stopped halfway down the staircase, placing a trembling hand over her heart. The strange silver warmth returned. It pulsed beneath her skin. One heartbeat, then another. The rhythm wasn't hers. It belonged to someone waiting below. Someone suffering. Someone calling to her without words. She had never believed in destiny. Yet tonight, destiny seemed to believe in her. The final staircase opened into a massive underground corridor lined with burning braziers. Several wounded guards leaned against the walls. One man's arm hung uselessly at his side. Another struggled to breathe through bloodied lips. The moment they saw Elara, horror crossed every face. No. Captain Rowan's voice was rough with exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" Elara looked past him toward the enormous iron doors at the end of the corridor. Each impact from the other side made the walls tremble. "Someone is hurt." Rowan stared at her in disbelief. "Hurt? The king." Silence. No one answered. Finally, Rowan spoke. "The king is beyond saving tonight." Another earth-shaking roar exploded behind the doors. Iron hinges groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. The creature inside, Rowan swallowed, is no longer his majesty. Elara looked into the exhausted faces surrounding her. These were warriors who had faced battlefields without fear. Yet every one of them looked terrified. Not for themselves. For their king. How long? Rowan frowned.
What?
How long has he endured this alone? The captain lowered his eyes. Nearly 12 years. Her heart broke. 12 years. 12 years of locking himself beneath his own castle every full moon. 12 years believing he was nothing more than a monster. No wonder his eyes carried so much loneliness. Another violent crash echoed from the chamber. This time, one of the enchanted hinges snapped. The heavy door shifted. A deep growl rolled into the corridor like thunder. Every warrior instinctively raised his weapon. Rowan drew his sword. "If the final seal breaks," he whispered, "the beast reaches the palace. The cubs, servants, children,
Thousands would die."
Elara slowly stepped toward the door. Immediately, Rowan blocked her path. "You don't understand what lives inside." She met his gaze.
No.
"I understand exactly what suffers inside." Before Rowan could stop her, she slipped past him. The captain reached for her arm. Too late. The massive iron door creaked open. A wave of heat and wild magic burst into the corridor. Every torch flickered violently. The scent of blood filled the air. Then, she stepped inside. The underground chamber looked like the aftermath of a war. Broken chains lay scattered across the stone floor. Massive pillars had been shattered into rubble. Deep claw marks covered every wall. Silver runes that once glowed brightly now flickered weakly beneath pools of blood. Several elite warriors struggled to stand after being thrown aside. At the center of the destruction, the beast turned. It was enormous, far larger than any wolf ever born beneath the moon. Black fur shimmered beneath torchlight like liquid night. Muscles rippled beneath its hide with terrifying power. Each claw was longer than a dagger. Its crimson eyes burned with the fury of centuries. The moment it saw Elara, everything stopped. The warriors froze. The growling ceased. Even the torches seemed to burn more quietly. The beast stared. Elara stared back. Fear rushed through every part of her body. Every instinct begged her to run. But beneath that fear, she saw something unexpected.
Pain.
Not rage. Not hunger.
Pain.
The same unbearable loneliness she had glimpsed inside Kaelin's eyes. The monster wasn't looking at prey. It was looking at someone it didn't understand. Captain Rowan burst through the doorway. "Get out!" The beast's ears twitched. Its attention shifted toward the captain. It roared. The sound shook dust from the ceiling. In a blur of black fur and silver claws, it lunged. Rowan barely raised his sword. He wasn't fast enough. The massive claw swept toward him with enough force to tear him in half. No! Without thinking, Elara ran. She threw herself between the beast and Rowan. Her arms spread instinctively, exactly as they had in Frostpine Valley, exactly as they had over the cubs. Her eyes squeezed shut. She expected unbearable pain. She expected death. Instead, silence. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The beast's enormous claw had stopped only inches from her face. Its claws trembled. Its entire body shook violently. Crimson eyes stared into hers. Within them, she saw something impossible. Recognition. Not from the monster. From the man trapped inside it. Kaelin was still there. Fighting.
Begging.
Refusing to let himself become the thing he feared most. A tear rolled down Elara's cheek. "So," she whispered, "you're still here." The beast let out a low, broken sound unlike any roar before. It almost sounded like grief. Another pulse echoed through the chamber. Silver light spread beneath Elara's feet. Ancient runes buried inside the stone awakened one by one. The walls themselves began glowing. Outside the chamber, Rowan stared in disbelief. The first moon? One elderly shaman dropped to his knees. It cannot be. The runes hadn't awakened in over 400 years. Yet they now blazed with living light. Elara slowly raised one trembling hand. Every warrior shouted at once. Don't! But she couldn't stop. Something guided her. Not magic. Not courage. Compassion. Her fingertips gently rested against the beast's enormous forehead. The instant skin met fur. The entire chamber exploded with silver light. A powerful wave of ancient energy swept through the fortress. Candles reignited throughout the castle. The frozen fountains above suddenly began flowing. Every wolf inside Blackfang Keep lifted its head toward the moon and howled in perfect harmony. Inside the chamber, the beast froze. Its breathing slowed. The murderous fury inside its crimson eyes began fading. Darkness retreated. Pain remained. Then, for the first time in 12 long years, the creature leaned into someone's touch, like a wounded soul who had finally found home. Tears filled Elara's eyes as she gently whispered, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." The beast closed its eyes. A single tear slipped through the black fur beneath one crimson eye. And, across the chamber, Lady Seraphine stood hidden behind the cracked doorway, watching every impossible moment unfold. Her beautiful face slowly lost all color, because she had just witnessed the one thing she had feared more than death itself. The prophecy was real. And if the Alpha King and the Omega truly completed the ancient moon bond, no power in the kingdom would ever be strong enough to separate them. Seraphine quietly stepped back into the shadows. Her expression hardened into cold determination. "If the bond cannot be broken," she whispered, "then the girl must." She disappeared into the darkness, already planning a betrayal that would shake the entire kingdom. Silence settled over the underground chamber. Not the uneasy silence that follows battle. Not the fearful silence born of uncertainty. This was something far stranger. It was the silence of a miracle. The enormous beast remained motionless beneath Elara's trembling hand, its thunderous breathing slowing with every passing heartbeat. Moments earlier, it had been strong enough to tear enchanted chains from the mountain itself. Now, it stood perfectly still, lowering its massive head as though surrendering to a peace it had forgotten existed. Silver light flowed gently beneath Elara's feet, spreading through the ancient runes carved into the stone floor. The symbols pulsed like living stars awakened after centuries of sleep, casting soft reflections across shattered pillars and pools of blood. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. Captain Rowan slowly lowered his sword. The warriors who had expected to die only moments ago stared in speechless disbelief. One elderly shaman fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I have waited 60 years. His voice trembled. "To see this prophecy fulfilled." Another shaman whispered in fear, "The Moon Mother has chosen." The words echoed through the chamber like a prayer. Chosen. No one had spoken that word for generations. Elara barely heard them. Her attention remained fixed upon the creature before her. She could feel its pain, not through magic alone, through something much deeper. Every scar hidden beneath the king's monstrous form felt like an echo inside her own heart. She sensed years of loneliness, endless nights locked behind iron doors, the crushing guilt of fearing his own strength. No one deserved to suffer alone for so long. Without realizing it, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "You've carried this by yourself," she whispered, "for far too long." The beast's crimson eyes softened. Its enormous body trembled. Then something extraordinary happened. The dark energy swirling around its fur began fading like smoke scattered by morning sunlight. Bones shifted. Claws shortened. The towering monster collapsed onto one knee. The transformation wasn't complete. Not yet. But for the first time in 12 years, the curse was retreating instead of growing stronger. Kalen gasped. Air rushed violently into his lungs. His vision blurred. He barely recognized the ruined chamber around him. His body felt unbearably heavy. Fragments of memory returned in painful flashes. Broken chains. Roaring.
Blood.
Then, warm fingers against his face. He slowly opened his eyes. Elara knelt before him. Her cloak was stained with dirt and dried blood from the attack in Frostpine Valley. Loose strands of chestnut hair framed her exhausted face, while tears shimmered beneath her hazel eyes. She looked relieved. Relieved to see him alive. No one had ever looked at him like that before. Not with fear. Not with duty. But with quiet compassion. Kalen stared at her. His voice emerged little more than a whisper. You should have run. A faint smile appeared despite her exhaustion. I've already ignored that advice once. For the first time in years, a quiet laugh escaped him.
Soft.
Broken. Almost unfamiliar. The warriors exchanged stunned glances. Some of them had served Kalen for over a decade. None of them had heard their king laugh since before the queen's death. Above the chamber, word spread through Blackfang Keep faster than wildfire. The king survived. The curse stopped, and Omega touched the beast. Servants whispered in every hallway. Kitchen workers abandoned their duties just to exchange rumors. Some spoke with hope, others with fear. But in the royal court, hope was dangerous. Lady Seraphine stood inside her private solar overlooking the snow-covered kingdom. The fireplace crackled behind her, yet the room felt colder than winter itself. Lord Cashin entered quietly. You summoned me. Without turning around, Seraphine asked, How many witnessed tonight? Nearly 40. Her jaw tightened. Too many. Cashin hesitated. The soldiers already believe the Omega is blessed. Seraphine slowly faced him.
No.
They must believe she's cursed. Cashin frowned. My lady, if the people worship her, her voice remained calm, they will follow her. And if they follow her, she stepped closer, they will stop fearing the throne. Fear had always been the foundation of Kalen's rule. Love would change everything. That could never be allowed. We begin tomorrow. Cashin bowed. What are your orders? A slow smile touched Seraphine's lips. Rumors first. She walked toward the fire. Poison travels faster than truth. The following morning, Elara stepped into the palace gardens with the royal cubs racing happily around her feet. For the first time since arriving at Blackfang Keep, the castle felt peaceful. Fresh snow sparkled beneath gentle sunlight. Children's laughter echoed across the gardens. The cubs chased drifting snowflakes, while Elara watched them with a smile she hadn't realized she'd missed. One tiny cub suddenly ran toward the fountain. Before Elara could follow, someone else reached him first. Kalen. The massive Alpha King lifted the little cub effortlessly before placing him safely back upon the path. The cub barked happily before racing away again. Kalen remained standing beside Elara. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Winter winds carried loose strands of her hair across her face. Without thinking, he reached toward her. His large hand gently brushed the strands behind her ear. The movement was almost instinctive, almost possessive. The instant his fingers touched her skin, that strange silver heartbeat echoed once more. Thump, thump, thump. The air shimmered. Snowflakes froze in midair for a single heartbeat. Ancient trees surrounding the gardens released thousands of silver leaves despite it being the middle of winter. Every wolf inside Blackfang Keep lifted its head simultaneously. The soul bond had grown stronger. Neither Kalen nor Elara understood what they had awakened. But someone else did. Hidden behind an ivy-covered stone archway, Lady Seraphine watched everything. Her emerald eyes narrowed as Kalen looked at Elara, not as a ruler observing a guest, but as a man unconsciously drawn toward the only person capable of calming the storm inside him. Seraphine had spent years trying to earn that gaze. Years. And the forgotten Omega had received it in days. Jealousy twisted quietly into hatred. Not loud. Not explosive. Cold. Patient. Dangerous. She slipped a small crystal vial from within her sleeve. Inside shimmered a single drop of black liquid. Forbidden shadow essence. A poison that could corrupt even sacred magic. Seraphine closed her fingers around it. If kindness gave you his heart, she whispered to herself, then your own kindness will become the weapon that destroys you. High above the palace, a flock of ravens suddenly erupted into the sky. Their frantic cries echoed across Ashenfang like an omen. Far beyond the mountains, an army had already begun marching. And, inside Blackfang Keep, the first lie of many was about to be whispered. Morning arrived beneath a sky of pale silver. The storm that had raged through the mountains during the night had finally passed, leaving Blackfang Keep wrapped in a blanket of untouched snow. Sunlight spilled across the towering battlements, making the ancient fortress appear almost peaceful. Almost, because beneath its stone halls, a different kind of storm had already begun. Unlike arrows or claws, this one could not be blocked with armor. It spread through whispers, through smiles, through carefully chosen words. And before sunset, it would reach every corner of the kingdom. The palace kitchens, usually filled with laughter and the aroma of fresh bread, had become unusually quiet. Servants leaned close to one another while pretending to prepare the morning meal. I heard, she touched the beast. My cousin guards the western tower. He swears the king knelt before her. And Omega shouldn't possess magic like that. No, it wasn't healing. A cook lowered her voice. My grandmother warned me about moon witches. Another servant immediately crossed herself. They charm powerful men. They steal kingdoms. The rumor changed shape with every mouth that repeated it. No one remembered where it had started, exactly as Lady Seraphine intended. Far above, inside the royal council chamber, Kaelin sat at the head of a long obsidian table. The kingdom's highest nobles filled both sides. Maps lay scattered before them, reports from border scouts, letters from neighboring kingdoms, lists of missing supplies. Normally, Kaelin's attention never wandered during council. Today,
It did.
Lord Edric cleared his throat. Your Majesty? Kaelin blinked. You've repeated the same question 3 times. The room fell awkwardly silent. That had never happened before. Not once. Seraphine noticed immediately. Every noble noticed. The Iron Wolf, the king whose focus never broke even during battle, had become distracted.
She already knew why.
Kaelin forced his attention back toward the council. The eastern borders. Lord Edric nodded. Our scouts report unusual movement. Bandits. No. He hesitated. Disciplined soldiers. The chamber grew colder. Whose banners? None. That answer was worse. Armies without banners usually belonged to people who wished to deny they had ever invaded. Kaelin's jaw tightened. Double every northern patrol. Yes, Your Majesty. As the council continued, Seraphine quietly studied him. His posture remained rigid.
His voice steady.
But every few moments, his gaze drifted toward the enormous palace windows overlooking the gardens below, where Elara played with the royal cubs. He didn't even realize he was searching for her.
Seraphine did.
Outside, the palace gardens felt like another world. The cubs darted happily between snow-covered hedges, chasing one another around frozen fountains while tiny clouds of white breath escaped their playful barks. Elara laughed softly as the smallest cub stubbornly tried to pounce on drifting snowflakes. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about surviving, only living. An elderly gardener approached carrying a basket of winter roses. He bowed respectfully. My lady. She looked behind herself. Me? He smiled kindly. There is no one else here. Elara laughed nervously. I'm not a lady. Perhaps not yet. His words lingered strangely. Before she could respond, the old man handed her a single white rose. My wife always believed flowers bloom brightest near gentle souls. He quietly walked away. Elara stared at the delicate blossom. No one had ever given her flowers before. High above, Kaelin watched the exchange from the council chamber window. Without realizing it, he smiled. Very slightly, but enough. Lord Rowan noticed. Seraphine noticed. Every noble sitting near the king noticed. An uncomfortable silence settled across the room, because the impossible had happened again. The Iron Wolf smiled, not because of victory, Not because of war, because of an Omega. That evening, Seraphine hosted an elegant gathering inside the Moon Hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of candles across polished marble floors. Nobles dressed in embroidered silks laughed behind jeweled goblets. Musicians played soft melodies while servants carried silver trays overflowing with food. Everything appeared perfect, which meant it had been carefully designed. Kaelin rarely attended celebrations. Tonight, Seraphine personally insisted.
For morale, she had said.
He reluctantly agreed. Elara stood near one of the towering windows, uncomfortable beneath dozens of curious stares. She had borrowed a simple silver gown from the palace attendants. Beautiful, yet modest. Nothing about her appearance sought attention, which somehow made every eye follow her anyway. Whispers floated around the ballroom. That's her. The Omega. The Beast's healer. No. The Beast's controller. Each version sounded more dangerous than the last. Elara lowered her eyes. She had spent years avoiding attention. Now, she had become the center of it. Kaelin entered the ballroom. Conversation stopped. As always, he acknowledged the nobles with a single nod before instinctively searching the room. His eyes found Elara almost immediately, standing alone, surrounded by people, yet completely isolated. Something inside him tightened. He crossed the ballroom without thinking. Every noble watched. Every servant noticed. Even the musicians slowed their performance. Kaelin stopped before her. You've barely eaten. She blinked. You noticed? I notice everything. The words escaped before he realized how personal they sounded. A faint blush warmed Elara's cheeks. So I've heard. Silence settled between them. Comfortable. Unexpected. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade away. For one fragile moment, it felt as though only the two of them existed. Kaelin quietly offered his arm. Walk with me. Before Elara could answer, a crystal goblet shattered. The sharp crash echoed through the hall. Every head turned. A young noblewoman pointed toward Elara. Her face had gone deathly pale. The wine. Everyone followed her trembling finger. The goblet Elara had touched moments earlier now contained swirling black smoke rising from the crimson liquid. A palace alchemist rushed forward. His expression changed instantly. Shadow essence. Panic erupted. It was poisoned. Who touched the cup? She did. No. She was the last one holding it. Dozens of frightened eyes turned toward Elara. Confusion flooded her face.
I didn't.
Seraphine stepped forward at exactly the right moment, her expression filled with carefully crafted concern. No one is accusing anyone. Her gentle voice only fueled the fear. But shadow essence cannot appear by accident. The ballroom fell silent. Kaelin's eyes shifted from the poisoned goblet
To Elara.
For the first time since they met. A shadow of doubt flickered across his face. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Elara saw it. And that single heartbeat hurt more than any arrow ever could. Hidden behind lowered lashes, Lady Seraphine smiled. The first crack had appeared. Now, she intended to break them both.